Then, don't leave the TV on, and either turn off the lights in the living room or your room. Got it, got it. I'll make sure to save energy. I was leaving the house to go shopping far away. Whether I was out or at home, everyone in the family was committed to saving energy, such as not forgetting to turn off lights or setting the air conditioner to the right temperature. Today, as usual, I went out after reminding each other in the family. However, when I returned a few hours later, my beloved home had completely changed. If you love saving that much, I'll save energy for you. The malicious laughter of my sister-in-law echoed. She had sneaked in and turned off our home's main breaker, causing a major problem. The reason she did such a thing was, my name is Nicola. I'm 29 years old, living in my in-laws' house after marrying James, who is the same age as me. My mother-in-law has passed away, and my father-in-law, David, who has a chronic respiratory condition, was living alone in his house. Concerned about his health, James persuaded me to move in and live together while I continued to work. In the in-laws' house, there's also Amelia, James's unmarried sister, with whom I've had a hard time getting along. David is gentle and kind, much like James. On the other hand, Amelia has a rough temperament and is prone to emotional ups and downs. Being straightforward, I've had several clashes with her, and it's been somewhat of an effort to keep her in check since I'm a few years older. Aside from Amelia, it was a peaceful life. However, within half a year, David's illness worsened. He needed an oxygen concentrator to stay at home. Since both Amelia and I were working, we couldn't be there during the day to help David if needed. We should have arranged for him to move into a care facility for a more secure living environment, but David refused to leave the in-laws' house filled with memories of my mother-in-law. After consulting with James, we concluded that forcibly moving David would be detrimental to his health and cruel. So, we decided to hire a home caregiver, but problems arose here too. Not only did Amelia have a bad relationship with me, but she also disliked the idea of strangers entering her home, and started harassing the caregiver. Moreover, she hurled insults and made sarcastic comments out of our sight. She interfered with their work, and claimed that if they did not meet her expectations, they were unfit to care for David, repeatedly complaining to the agency. We were distressed having several caregivers quit, but when we found out the cause it was too late. The agency informed us they could no longer send anyone, leaving us abandoned. What do we do now? Other companies have turned us down too. We're probably blacklisted. Damn it! All because of Amelia. Known for causing trouble, we couldn't hope for any more home caregivers. We sighed and had no choice but to think of a solution. Amelia was inherently selfish and isolated from the family. James, as her brother, tried to correct her behavior, but it only led to fierce arguments, and he even told her to move out and live independently. However, Amelia was infuriated by being scolded in such a manner and started lashing out at me, easier to confront than James. You're married now, so Nicola should take care of it. My brother can't quit his job because he's a man, but you're different. Hearing this, James would argue with Amelia again. This situation didn't allow David to focus on his recovery. I didn't like complying with Amelia's demands, but there was no choice. David, despite his illness, always tried to be cheerful and made efforts so I wouldn't feel out of place. Feeling indebted to David, I said, I'll quit my job to take care of David. I'll start studying caregiving bit by bit. After all, David is family to me. Deciding to retire for caregiving, David and James expressed their gratitude with tears. Caregiving was completely new to me, and it was hard at first, but David always encouraged me gently. The only thing that didn't change was Amelia. She never moved out or helped with household chores or caregiving. On her days off, she would disappear to go out and have fun. Though I now have more time available, there's still the matter of caring for David and studying caregiving. James and I shared the household chores, but whenever there were imperfections, Amelia was quick to criticize. Oh, wasn't it Nicola who decided to take on both caregiving and housework? You like doing everything by yourself, don't you? If I retorted even slightly, she'd hit back with sarcasm. She harassed me this way, but James and the others would quickly find out and scold her repeatedly. Each time, she would play the victim, saying, "Dad's too kind to say anything. I'm just speaking up on his behalf." Of course, there was no improvement, and her interference only served to interrupt my work, quickly leading to stress accumulation. I'm truly grateful to the home caregivers who managed to smile through Amelia's persistent behavior. Not just me, but David and the others were also weary of Amelia's stubborn attitude. However, on a day James and I were discussing how to encourage her independence. "I've got a fiancé now, so I'm moving out. Bye, Dad. I'll come back to visit sometimes." With that, Amelia left the house quite abruptly. We were stunned, but with her departure, the atmosphere at home stabilized. Although there was talk of David moving to a care facility due to his age and condition, I was getting accustomed to caregiving, so we decided to continue with it at home. Amelia, now living with her fiancé's family, frequently returned to her childhood home. "There'll be leftovers from dinner tonight, right? Put them in a storage container. I'll take them home with me." It seemed she was relying on our leftovers to avoid preparing meals for her fiancé. Her selfish nature was intact, treating me like a housekeeper as before. "Amelia, don't order Nicola around without offering to help yourself." Yeah, sorry, Nicola." "All right then, hurry up with dinner, will you?" David's admonishments seemed to go unheard, merely brushed aside. To be honest, the amount of food I prepared hadn't changed since she left, so that wasn't really an issue. The real problem was the increased expenses on groceries and utilities. Despite moving out, Amelia stopped contributing financially but frequently returned to do as she pleased, leading to higher outlays. Moreover, she had no concept of saving energy or money. "Amelia, please turn off the lights in rooms you're not using. And about the shower, can I use it first if you're not going to?" Amelia was lounging on the couch, her back to the TV that was left on, engrossed in her mobile phone game. She had turned on all the lights in the bathroom and dressing area, intending to take a shower, but showed no signs of moving. Her lingering here was causing a delay for others. When asked to decide between gaming or showering, Amelia glared at me irritably. Fine. I was about to go now. Can you not bother me? Always on about saving and conserving, are you dumb? It's not like it makes that much of a difference, being so stingy over small things. Amelia, watch your language. Yeah, sorry. David scolded, and she retorted. Finally, Amelia turned off the TV and headed to the bathroom. She complained, but at least she listened to what we said. Though being years into her career and engaged, her attitude remained that of a rebellious teenager. I had long stopped expecting her to act her age. Though it was not a concern, my relationship with Amelia remained tense, even after she left home. I thought saving and conserving could be a common ground for our family, but that proved difficult. One day, I was driving to a large shopping mall in the suburbs. I was tasked by David with running errands. David isn't unable to go out, but he needs to carry a portable oxygen tank when he does. For David, in his old age, carrying a heavy tank was bothersome, even if it had a carrier, and moreover it was all too visible with the nasal cannula. Tired of being pitted every time he met someone he knew, David preferred staying home. David asked for us to run errands for him many times, but James usually took care of these tasks when he was home. I was careful not to leave David alone, but this time our schedules didn't align, and I had to leave David behind. I was worried, but it's not like David couldn't manage on his own. He needed the tank because breathing didn't come easily, but he could still do a lot on his own. While it's important to save electricity, I asked him to use the air conditioning as needed, and with that, I headed out to shop. After completing the shopping without any issues, I returned to our home's parking lot a few hours later. It was late afternoon, although I had left in the late morning. Before entering the house, I checked my mobile phone. Sometimes James contacts me about dinner plans. But what I saw on the screen surprised me. There were countless missed calls. The callers were James, David, and the general hospital David attends. A cold sweat broke out on my back. When driving, I switched my phone to a mode where it wouldn't ring. Planning to return quickly today, I forgot to switch it back before shopping, and hadn't realized calls were coming in. A sense of foreboding washed over me. I tried to call James first, but the phone just rang multiple times without connecting. Growing more anxious, I tried David's number next, but there was no response there either. Finally, clinging to a sliver of hope, I called the hospital. A receptionist answered, and trying to suppress my panic, I inquired about David. "He's currently admitted. We can't discuss details over the phone, so could you please come in?" After being transferred through several departments, I was informed of this and became paralyzed. I quickly replied that I was on my way, hurriedly turned the car key, and restarted the engine. In the car, I was frantic. As if materializing my fears, the roads were congested. David had been fine when I left, waving me off as usual. Why would he suddenly need to be hospitalized? I deeply regretted leaving him alone. Upon arriving at the hospital, I was directed to David's room. Walking down the increasingly tense corridor, I quietly opened the door to find James already seated there. We looked at each other in surprise. However, James explained that he was at the hospital first, waiting for David's tests, which is why he couldn't answer the phone. I too had been driving, unable to respond to calls. "Sorry for not answering the phone." "No, it's okay." "So, how is David doing?" Prompted by him, I looked over at David sleeping in the bed. His complexion seemed a bit off, but the breathing sounds I was worried about seemed steady. "It's okay, there's no issue with his condition. He's just admitted for some tests." Actually, hearing from James that David wasn't in danger finally put me at ease. So, why was David admitted? Just as I was about to ask this question, the door to the room burst open. It was Amelia, rushing in. Her eyes were filled with terror, ignoring us and rushing straight to David's bedside. Seeing him lying there, she screamed loudly. "Ah! What has happened to Dad?" James hurried to calm her down. But her panicked cries continued to echo in the room. "Please, calm down." James tried to pull her away from the bed. Her voice, initially fearful, gradually quieted down, but then she suddenly turned to me, glaring and shouting with raw emotion. "You were with him! What happened?" Her accusations struck me, leaving me speechless. James intervened to calm things down, but her anger was still directed at me. Confused, I was caught in a strange sensation. David needed oxygen, but such a sudden hospitalization seemed unlikely. "Wait. Can't we talk about this calmly?" James turned back to us with a quiet tone, starting to explain what he knew. David was transported here because the oxygen concentrator's power was cut off. After I left, David was sleeping in his room when the power went off. He woke up feeling suffocated and tried to turn the machine back on, but it wouldn't work, and he couldn't reach me or James. David connected himself to a portable tank to catch his breath, but was anxious about waiting alone without knowing when we would return. David, struggling with a headache, decided to go to the hospital, but since we usually drove, he had no way to get there. He then attempted to call a taxi, but his hands trembled so much that even making a call became difficult. So, David went to ask a neighbor to call a taxi for him. Upon stepping outside, the neighbor screamed at the sight of David. They took him to the living room, laid him down, and applied copious amounts of ice while calling an ambulance. It was then that David realized he was suffering from heat stroke. Thanks to timely treatment at the hospital, his condition stabilized and he was safe. According to what James heard from the doctor, David, perhaps due to his age, had a diminished ability to feel heat, and he didn't realize that his trembling hands and headache were symptoms of heat stroke, rather than old age. He also had convulsions, so immediate treatment and hospitalization were necessary. Hearing James's explanation, I couldn't help but express my doubts. The power for the device not coming on. It's hard to believe the plug could have come loose. We installed it in a place where it couldn't be accidentally unplugged, right? James frowned, deep in thought. Amelia remained silent. However, her face was visibly pale. That's correct. It couldn't have come unplugged on its own. I went back to check, and indeed, the plug was still in. Then how? I was even more confused by James's words. He had returned home to prepare for the hospital stay. And noticed the power was off, but the plug was still connected. He then looked sternly at Amelia. Her pallor suggested she was hiding something, but it was unclear why James was so angry. Suddenly, James raised his voice at Amelia. You turned off the breaker, didn't you? Say something. As James's voice echoed in the room, Amelia started trembling. Struggling to speak, but only managing to utter incoherent sounds. Then James took something out of his pocket. The hospital had tried to contact me, James, and Amelia several times, but James was the first to connect. Returning home to prepare, James immediately felt something was off upon entering. He was greeted by an unbelievable heat wave. Noticing the hall light didn't work, James checked around the house and found all appliances stopped. Rushing to the breaker, he found it switched to OFF, as he suspected. James was stunned and suspicious. Why would this happen? There was no report of lightning or any incident that could cause the breaker to trip. Other homes were unaffected, with no reports of power outages. However, James remembered something important. Our home had several security cameras installed. This was before I married James, insisted by David after a burglary, for his wife's peace of mind. Despite our commitment to saving, the cameras were kept for our safety. The footage before the power outage should be available. Rushing to restore power, James checked the records. I've got the footage here. I wanted to show both of you, so I transferred it. James took out his mobile phone in the hospital room and showed us the transferred footage. The first scene was our familiar home entrance. Some time after I left, Amelia made her appearance. It was the first time I knew she had come to the house, and I couldn't help but glance at her next to me. She used her own key to open the front door and enter. The usual noise was absent. Instead, she looked around, as if searching for something. It was almost as if she was checking to see if I wasn't there. James started operating his mobile phone, now switching to the footage from a camera inside the entrance. Our home's circuit breaker is located near the ceiling of the shoe cabinet. Amelia climbed onto the chair placed for sitting while wearing shoes and opened the cover of the breaker. What are you doing? Even though I knew what was happening, I couldn't suppress such a scream. The camera had a voice recognition system that starts recording when it detects sound, so it recorded not just the sounds of Amelia moving but also her chilling whispers. This is the breaker, right? If the fridge stops, that penny pincher will calm down a bit, won't she? A maliciously laughing voice echoed in the quiet, silent hospital room. Look, I'm saving energy, just like you love to do. After she turned off the breaker, the footage ended. We were at a loss for words, standing frozen in place. Turning off the breaker would, of course, stop the power supply throughout the house. For the several hours until James noticed, the contents of the fridge must have turned into a disaster, just as she planned. From the way she rushed into the hospital room, it seemed she hadn't realized her actions could endanger David's life, but to punish me, it was too cruel. Yet, she took an action I could never have imagined. I did it because you're always nagging about saving energy. She started to raise her voice in an attempt to justify herself, tears welling up in her eyes. I didn't know Dad was home. I thought you went out together. It's your fault for leaving him behind. I didn't think this would happen, she repeated. Contrary to her tearful self-defense, my heart was ablaze with anger. Sneaking in like a thief and turning off the breaker, it's miraculous he survived. If something had happened to David, I couldn't help but blame Amelia, but she raised her voice even louder to blame me. "But it's your fault. You shouldn't have left Dad. It's all because of you." Her accusation pierced my heart. Indeed, I shouldn't have left David behind. Leaving him behind, saying that going far would be a burden, was perhaps my mistake. As the hospital room filled with tension, suddenly it was shattered. "Quiet down." David, who we thought had been asleep, rebuked her. He couldn't raise his voice much due to his illness. Being naturally gentle, we were all shocked. All three of us turned our gazes to him. "Do you understand what you've done? Causing trouble for everyone, almost killing your father. Nicola isn't to blame." David's eyes were filled with anger and disappointment. His tone was much stricter than his usual gentle demeanor. Woken up by Amelia's screaming and the commotion, he had woken up and heard everything, including the surveillance camera footage. "If you're going to keep making noise, leave. And don't ever come back to the house." After being scolded, Amelia turned pale, frozen in place, but then she suddenly started crying. And rather loudly, which was very annoying. Amelia was apologizing to David, but James said, "Leave, you're a nuisance." And she was driven out of the hospital room. David was discharged just a few days later. When James and I went to pick him up from the hospital, he greeted us with a relieved smile, apparently feeling better. But upon returning home, Amelia was waiting at the entrance. She hadn't shown herself to us since that incident. We were expecting an apology, but what came out of her mouth were the same words as before. "It's your fault. Everything that happened to Dad is all because of you." David and James could only wear expressions of utter disbelief. David stepped forward towards Amelia, unwilling to admit fault and still trying to push the blame onto me. "Be grateful we're not taking you to the police just because you're family. Your actions are absolutely unforgivable." David's cold voice, unchanged even outside the hospital room, made her fall silent. But David didn't stop there. He had come to despise her from the bottom of his heart. "I'm disowning you. I can't believe you still don't understand the seriousness of what you've done. As I said at the hospital, never come to our house again." With those harsh words, he brushed past Amelia and entered the house. She probably never imagined being disowned by her father. She stood there, dumbfounded. We sided with David's anger, deciding to support him. So, we left her outside and went back into the house. Afterward, Amelia sent numerous apologies. But David ignored them all. Having been caused so much trouble, we had no sympathy for her and maintained our stance. David had been asked to financially support Amelia's wedding and honeymoon, but he refused all requests and firmly stated he would not attend the wedding. One day, I was ambushed outside our house by her. She desperately apologized and pleaded with me to persuade David, but I had already decided not to forgive her. Knowing ignoring her would only make her more persistent, I quietly listened to everything Amelia had to say, then left her there and walked away. This series of events eventually became known to Amelia's fiancé. David had declined attending the wedding for safety reasons, but the fiancé, puzzled by this, reached out to David. It turned out she had twisted the story to suit herself, but upon hearing about the breaker incident that led to David's emergency transport, the fiancé apologized to David in a panicked frenzy. The fiancé was sensible, unlike Amelia. Calling her actions akin to attempted murder, their marriage was ultimately called off. The lease for their new home was cancelled before they could move in. Amelia was kicked out of the fiancé's house, but she had already quit her job in anticipation of getting married. Thanks to expenses on beauty treatments and salons in preparation for the wedding, her savings were nearly gone. And with the wedding venue already booked for the imminent event, she had to cover half of the cancellation fees. She ended up struggling with debt due to her own actions, but thankfully didn't show up at our place anymore. Meanwhile, the three of us have been living peacefully. Perhaps because we're no longer being disturbed and hurt by Amelia, David's condition has improved more than before. While we can't be careless because of his age, it seems we won't need to consider nursing home admission for a while. In fact, we're even planning a trip.